recent years, it feels as though the phrase, "but it's satire," has been used as a defensive strategy for everything from poorly executed comedy sketches, complex film commentaries, loaded images, and offensive marketing campaigns. Nobody can agree over what counts as satire anymore, with obvious examples of it going straight over our heads, while others wrongly proclaim that something is satirical when it couldn't be further from the definition, creating vast disagreement and confusion about modern examples of its usage, definition, and effectiveness in the digital age. If you're anything like me, you'll have found yourself being swept up in this bizarre social media circus where you doubt everything you thought you knew. Facts and fiction are now the same thing. Clear-cut truths no longer bear any weight, as coded words, misguided moral intentions, and ulterior motives all blur together in one ambiguous blob. Any piece of media can be molded into whatever it needs to be to avoid accountability or deflect from its poor execution, shifting from one definition to another depending on what people want or don't want it to be. If you are rightly offended by something offensive, you're now in the wrong for not understanding it or reading too much into it. If something defies your understanding, it's because you lack the media literacy skills to analyze it and are taking it at face value. If you didn't think something was satirical, you're now stupid because others are saying it clearly is. And if you did think something was satirical, you now doubt yourself because others are debating this fact. Suddenly, we live in a world where everything has taken on new meaning, creating a culture of perpetual doubt as agreed-upon truths fraction into a million different versions of the truth. A genre that used to thrive during times of political uncertainty and instability now seems to be dying, with satire slowly becoming obsolete as its definition is dragged through the mud and used for an entirely different purpose. It got me thinking, what the hell happened? How has satire evolved over the years? And why is it so misunderstood today? Welcome back to Pompous Unhelpful Knit and to my deep dive into the death of satire.
Honesty is such a lonely word. Everyone is so untrue. Honesty is hardly ever heard, and mostly what I need from you.
While this word might not be associated with the satire being produced today, it was once considered to be a dangerous art form, with its roots being traced back to a Greek writer called Archilochus, who wrote poems so scathing that his targets hung themselves in shame. Since then, the genre continued to grow, gaining popularity during the Roman Empire, then spreading amongst French playwrights, the writers of Elizabethan England, and then the great American novelists of the 20th century. From the very beginning, satire has been a crucial art form that prevents us from losing sight of ourselves, sending warning signals when we become detached from our humanity and stray too close to the wrong path. Since the early days of Archilochus and his lethal poems, the genre only continued to evolve as a creative tool, prompting societal realignment and introspection by encouraging its targets to take note of their internal contradictions, pointing out flaws that others turn a blind eye to or might not have the courage to expose. Whether it be George Orwell, Jonathan Swift, or Jane Austen, great satirists would act with the combined insight of a witch and a watchdog, keeping a finger on the collective pulse and making careful predictions about the future by remaining painfully aware of the past and critical of the present, able to put into words something few people could see. But in the 21st century, the subjects changed, our reaction to it evolved, and the popularity of the genre declined, even though the techniques stayed the same. Audiences became increasingly confused by how satire presents itself, and there came to be a point where it was not only being used less, but being widely misused and misinterpreted, with audiences beginning to debate its very purpose. And in order to understand why, we first need to go back and get to the bottom of what satire really means. If you look up the textbook definition of satire, you'll find something that roughly says, the use of humour to criticise someone/something's flaws and stupidity, often within the context of contemporary politics and topical issues. What's interesting about this is that it highlights our baseline understanding of the genre by reducing satire to two components. 1, the use of humour to form a critique, and 2, subject matter that is relevant to the socio-political context of our world. But what's slightly misleading about this definition is that there's no insight into the underlying qualities that must work in tandem with these components to create effective satire. So to begin with, let's dive a little bit deeper into the necessary qualities that are missing from the textbook definition and what really constitutes satire. Given that satire is a form of criticism, in order for it to land, the target of the critique must be widely agreed upon. If the audience doesn't know who/what is being criticised or disagree on who the target is, the critique will become confused and ineffective. Take Get Out, for example. One of the reasons it landed so well was because there was no dispute as to who the target of Jordan Peele's critique was. The audience is aligned with Chris's perspective, and everything we see is in service of creating a nuanced critique of white privilege, performative allyship, and systematic oppression. Other examples are films like Network, Full Metal Jacket, Parasite, and Nightcrawler, where the target is so clearly defined that there is no confusion about who is being criticised, something that is essential for the message to land. In recent years, there has been some confusion over which people are deserving of being criticised. However, satire is first and foremost a way of critiquing the powerful by exposing them to ridicule. For satire to land, not only does there have to be a commonly agreed upon target, but a target that is deserving of being challenged. A great example of this can be found in Succession, where the central characters are established as greedy, incompetent, and power-hungry billionaires who are willing to do anything to maintain power, with no human life worth enough to not be collateral damage. While the writers also explore the vulnerabilities of the Roy children and the legacy of abuse, they are also extremely flawed, immature, and corrupt, making them deserving targets in Armstrong's devastating critique of the American corporate elite. Another quality that is absolutely crucial in creating effective satire is the ability to hold a mirror up to ourselves and the world's problems in a way that is unsettling. While satire can be funny, it is not actually satirical unless it's paired with equal levels of discomfort. The most important response to satire is uneasiness, not laughter. A great example of this can be found in Mean Girls. While the film is known for its comedic genius, it also has incredibly uncomfortable moments as we see Katie's transition from being an unassuming and hardworking student who doesn't care about popularity to somebody who becomes consumed by obtaining popularity and conforming to the social hierarchies of high school. By the time we reach the climax of the film, Katie is just as bad as Regina George, the ultimate mean girl, who achieved popularity through mass fear, intimidation, and manipulation. It's an uncomfortable watch because we feel unsettled by the lengths that Katie goes to conform, but also by what this reveals about us. While we can condemn many of Katie's actions, we cannot say with certainty that we would behave differently, exposing a social structure that creates insecurity and how we all secretly yearn for the radical acceptance shown to Regina. To write in cold anger is to show detachment in language. To write in lofty anger is to affect disregard of an opponent. To write in cutting anger is to hold a victim in the icy grasp of irony. A satire may be inspired by rage, incite rage in its readers, but work around containing and conveying this rage in a subtle way. Given that effective satire is about exposing the worst people and institutions in the world, it's not surprising that strong feelings are evoked when exposing them, with anger being one of the driving forces behind a satirical critique. However, while the writer might be angry when writing about these things, anger must only be the engine of satire and not a direct expression of anger. Direct anger is a very harsh emotion and might make the audience too uncomfortable instead of being receptive to the writer's critique and views. Satire is instead an expression of coded anger. The anger is softened, the approach is indirect, and the emotion is controlled. In order for audiences to take your critique seriously, the anger cannot distract from its point or become the foundation of the argument. Take this example from Promising Young Woman. There is nothing subtle about this film and the argument it is trying to make, and the anger of the main character becomes the crux of the entire narrative. The reliance on this anger wipes any nuance from the story and renders the messaging completely meaningless, distracting audiences from what should have been a more carefully considered exploration of this subject matter. But if you look at a film like Carnal Knowledge, which has a similar critique, it is instead shown through the unemotional lens of the perpetrators, not the victims. Through this, Mike Nichols creates a cutting critique of toxic masculinity and misogyny, clinically peeling back the layers of entitled behaviour that only strips these men of their humanity and destroys their chances of ever achieving true intimacy. By reading satire, one can see the ubiquity of social problems and the continuity of social criticism. He will be constantly reminded that the conventional picture of the world is, to varying degrees, a false picture. While this point has already been mentioned, it's worth diving into a little deeper because it often gets lost. Satire is entirely dependent on context. Everything happening in the world is a context clue and a way of measuring its effectiveness, because at its core, satire is the takedown and challenging of real-world systems. And if it doesn't hold a mirror up to the world as it is, then it isn't satire. 1984 was published in 1949 and was a huge success because it resonated with the post-war world and the threat of fascism that still lingered in the public consciousness, doing so by creating an exaggerated version of a totalitarian society. People were keen to learn from the recent horrors and avoid another conflict on the scale they had just experienced, widely resonating as a rallying cry against the threats they had just fought. If we also go back to carnal knowledge, part of the reason why its impact was so explosive was because it was a direct counter-argument to the sexual revolution of the 70s, exposing the lesser-seen consequences of this movement through the lives of two men who are corrupted by their entitled attitude towards sex. It was also released towards the end of the Hays Code era, sparking controversy for its unromantic and uncensored portrayal of sex, which challenged the sexual status quo in Hollywood. So much so that there was a Supreme Court case in 1974 that tried and failed to ban the film for being legally obscene. Both Nichols and Orwell were completely ahead of their time, with Orwell predicting the loss of individuality and rise of self-surveillance through technology, and Nichols predicting the negative consequences of the sexual liberation movement, such as male entitlement towards sex and an increasingly dehumanizing approach towards intimacy. Satire lands because it sits in a space between normal and extreme, drawing parallels between our everyday reality and then heightening that reality to point out its flaws. But without any tangible ties to or consideration of our reality, it cannot work as a piece of satire. We often think of humour as being an essential quality of satire, but in reality, humour is not a prerequisite. There is plenty of great satire that lands without being funny in the slightest, whether it be Brave New World, Dogville, or Network. However, the satire that does use comedy to criticise will do so in a very specific way, using certain comedic techniques to create a humour that goes against our commonly held values and beliefs. These techniques are exaggeration, where you make something seem ridiculous by overinflating it; irony, which is the contrast between what is said and expected and what is meant/happens; parody, which is imitation to poke fun at something; reversal, where you switch a situation to highlight the absurdity of something we're used to; incongruity, where you place something outside of its normal context; and understatement, where you downplay the significance of something to mock it. BoJack Horseman is a great example of how this humour is used, with the show following a washed-up sitcom star who struggles with addiction and depression. While the show is funny, the humour highlights the emptiness of fame by dialing up the absurdity of BoJack's everyday life in Hollywood, revealing the entertainment industry to be a deeply unserious and corrupt business, and fame to be a burden. Because we imagine fame to be an affirming experience and Hollywood to be glamorous and serious, the humour goes against our values by revealing it to be the complete opposite, creating moments of profound sadness that cut through BoJack's facade and our preconceptions about success. Despite the idea that satire must criticise through humour, this is not true, and there are many satirical stories that lean on fear and darkness to make a point. While there are many people making great art that satirises our current reality, we've drifted so far from being a world that depended on the genre as a creative checks and balances system. During the digital age, satire has lost most of its potency and power, developing an alternative purpose that can be wielded incorrectly. So how exactly is it being used today? For some, satire has evolved into something of a defensive strategy, with creators either using the satirical label to gaslight the public when something they've made is subject to criticism.
We know that we're making a show that is provocative,
doesn't form a cohesive argument, or just doesn't land at all. Many artists now deflect accountability by putting the onus on the consumer and their failure to properly understand their work. It is now not their fault for making a poor piece of art or content, it is your fault for being critically illiterate or unable to take a joke, using the defense that they're satirizing that ideology or idea, even if they're endorsing it. Satire is now a way of deflecting and hiding coded messaging, whether intentional or not, while never acknowledging what is truly being communicated. While it used to be a method of critiquing the powers that be, it can now be used as a brainwashing tool of those powers, with wider forces that now play a bigger part in manipulating audiences into accepting the status quo and embracing an ideology that helps orchestrate your oppression, all while pretending it never happened. Let's take a closer look at some examples. It's interesting that the phrase, "it's satire," was used to bat away any criticism of Sabrina Carpenter's recent album cover. The image was immediately met with backlash, to which hordes of fans rushed to Carpenter's defense and explained her obviously satirical intentions, deeming anyone who disagreed with it as either illiterate and unable to understand its true meaning, or puritanical. While the image is ironic, it isn't satirical, and it's a great example of how this label is being misused. In the photo, Carpenter is on all fours while a man holds her hair. Through the name of the album and lyrics of the songs, we later learn that Carpenter is mocking herself and the irony of being hurt by a man while thinking she's the one in control, contrasting her sense of agency when pursuing a relationship and lack of agency when in a relationship. Through the focus on Sabrina and her expression in the image, we can glean that she believes that she's the one in control, with the irony coming from the fact that she is beneath the man and being physically restrained by him, and therefore somewhat out of control. However, it doesn't count as satire because it's missing a clear target. We have no idea exactly who/what is being criticised. It isn't criticising the man in the photo or men in general, and while it reflects the reality of womanhood and certain sexual dynamics, it certainly isn't critiquing that reality, it's just depicting it. So in order to understand what's really happening, let's take a closer look at the image itself and what is being communicated, as well as how different iterations of the image would change its meaning. Because the man's face is out of frame, the focus is placed on Sabrina, with her facial expression revealing how she feels about it. The way she is looking at the camera makes her look somewhat impulsive and cheeky, implying that she is enjoying this encounter and daring the voyeuristic gaze of the camera. While the sexual power dynamic on display can be a double-edged sword, her indifferent reaction likely mocks her naivety in believing that she has equal power and control to this man. However, she isn't criticizing this dynamic or the way that men treat women, because her expression implies that she enjoys and consented to this. We cannot see his reaction, yet alone how he feels about her, about sex, about women in general. While the image implies the negative consequences of this encounter, with her getting hurt after he pulls her hair, the knowing glint in her eyes frames the encounter as coming from her lack of judgment, not as the failure of men. Crucially, satire has to punch up instead of down, and in a world where men hold far more power than women, the image doesn't count as satire because the focus of the critique is projected onto Sabrina, not the man. There is no wider critique that justifies it as being labelled as satire. The only person being criticised is Sabrina, and that isn't a wider critique, just a personal one. However, there are different versions of this image that would allow it to work on a satirical level. For example, if she was the one holding his hair and the man was on the ground, then this would be commenting on the objectification of women by reversing the image to the opposite of what we were used to seeing, making use of the reversal and incongruity techniques. It would also work as satire if her outfit was the same, but facial expression was different, showing her unease with the potential danger of this situation, but feeling forced to pursue it anyway, commenting on the power that men hold to manipulate women into making choices that harm and oppress us. If she was wearing sweats and no makeup, it would work in opposition to the culturally normalized version of this image by creating something unpalatable and unsexy, mocking men and their sense of entitlement to women. But her current outfit and expression only glamorizes the situation and makes it look sexy. The lack of critique largely comes from her facial expression and outfit, and with some simple tweaks, many more nuances could be added besides a "look how much I'm getting played in my relationship." While I don't take offense at the image itself, I do at the idea that it is satire. Crucially, satire should hold a mirror up to the world and its problems, and there is no mirror. The reputation of satire has also been put through the ringer many other times, from the mislabeling of Saltburn as a satire about class, or Sam Levinson's so-called satire about the exploitation of female artists in The Idol, in which the camera undresses and I fucks Lily Rose Depp for the entirety of the show. It's very ironic that Levinson only abused his power and became the very thing he was satirizing by punching down at Jocelyn's oppression, only perpetuating the issues he supposedly critiques through his objectification of Lily Rose Depp and exploitation of the show's original creator. Before Levinson came on board, 80% of production had been completed with Amy Seimetz, a female director who wanted to shoot from the female perspective of exploitation in the music industry. But instead, Sam Levinson and The Weeknd wanted to disregard this and put forward their own vision, due to Abel's concerns that it was leaning too much towards a female perspective, despite being created to explore this very perspective. A member of production even reported these concerns to Rolling Stone magazine at the time, saying, "It went from satire to the thing it was satirizing." In the film industry, the satirical label has often been used as a means of protection for filmmakers to indulge in their most debased fantasies without criticism, not offering any critique of the culture they depict, and reveling in the oppressive ideas they're supposedly condemning. From the likes of Sam Levinson and his take on female exploitation to The Wolf of Wall Street, there have been many directors who have used the idea of satire and subversion to revel in problematic narratives for their own enjoyment or career gain. And if there are any people who call them out on it, they gaslight the hell out of them into thinking that they are stupid, problematic, uncreative, and puritanical for even daring to question their vision. If you didn't think Saltburn was satirical, then you're misogynistic for not supporting a female director. If you didn't understand the satire of The Idol, then you're a prude who doesn't understand his edgy style. And if you didn't think The Wolf of Wall Street was satirical, then you're too fucking stupid to understand the genius of the great Martin Scorsese, who in the eyes of his obsessive fanboys cannot do anything wrong because he made Taxi Driver. While some people think these cases exist in a vacuum and they aren't reflective of the film industry as a whole, I think it's crucial to question why these films are being made and what purpose they serve to the people at the top. After a brief spell of change in the film industry, all the progress being made has suddenly shifted and regressed. Nobody cares to check Sam Levinson on his regressive and insulting portrayal of women because he's within the exact demographic that the industry will protect and support. Nobody is going to stop Emerald Fennell from making films because her producers will keep leveraging her identity as a female filmmaker as a reason to support her, and she has the safety of her family's connections and money to dabble in whatever creative platform she chooses. Above all, these projects are symbolic of the values that the film industry has always held. The so-called mission for progress and equality was always a facade for many, and these films are reflective of the conservative ideas that are being drip-fed into our culture again, in the hopes of brainwashing us with their political agenda. It benefits the people at the top to have less women directing or employ women directors who don't create challenging stories and characters. To them, Emerald Fennell is the perfect female director because she earns them lots of money while enforcing the idea that the female audience is not to be taken seriously and don't deserve stories with depth or substance. It also benefits them to have women represented through Levinson's lens as sex objects, naturally reiterating the patriarchal hierarchy and forcing us into submission. It benefits them to have an industry extremely lacking in racial and ethnic diversity and then capitalize on any project that does feature people of color, using it to enforce their own image and reputation. While, like the Sabrina Carpenter image, these films might just seem like one-off cases that are only emblematic of the director's style, it is important to question the popularity of these artists and how their messaging aligns with the agenda of the people at the top. While it might be reflective of their brand or creative identity, why is it being made now? Why is their work being prioritized over other artists? Does their work subconsciously align with the cultural shift towards conservatism that is being popularized in mainstream culture? Art and politics don't exist in separate vacuums, and while these projects might seem harmless on the outside, you almost have to question their innocence, because can you say with certainty that they are? Knowing what we do about the entertainment industry, I can't say that I do. While we now know more about the misuse of the satirical label, we've come no closer to understanding the story of its demise. Contrary to the claims of Tom Lehrer, who said that political satire became obsolete when Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the death of satire wasn't caused by a single incident. Instead, I would argue that it was a death by 1,000 cuts, one that doesn't span back to a specific moment in time, but rather the end of an era in which everything began to change for the worse. Satire no longer bears any resemblance to its former self, with countless cultural and political shifts that have slowly chipped away at the integrity of the genre and the value of truth itself. But in order for us to understand the position we find ourselves in now, we must first go back and look at the exact changes that affected the future of satire. Satire lands when it sits in the space between normal and extreme. It might be about people or institutions that we see in the real world, but their actions, personality traits, or flaws are exaggerated. At its core, satire is the idea of taking something real and making it absurd. But in a time when everything real is absurd, how can you create satire? This is one of the key disturbances within the genre, because if our reality is more extreme than any reality we could create, then there is no capacity for exaggeration, a quality that is crucial to satire. Writers and artists are struggling to come up with material that is more farcical than reality. As we reach the era that many great satirists tried to warn us about, there is little left to be warned about, with all the predictions made by David Foster Wallace, George Orwell, and Margaret Atwood being actualized in everyday life. Everything and nothing is satire, so what left is there to reach for? In the past, artists were seen as the creators of the future. Filmmakers and writers were daring with their words and images, conjuring up new visions for the future that gave us something to aspire towards. From futuristic sci-fi films where the characters drive flying cars, or novels that reimagine society as a non-hierarchical utopia, artists have inadvertently redesigned our future by creating concepts that allow us to think bigger. Leading AI founders have cited WALL-E as the inspiration behind the design of their robots. Who could have known that a Pixar film would influence one of the biggest global industries and threats to humanity just over a decade later? The characters of the 1966 Star Trek series used devices called communicators, which directly influenced Martin Cooper to create the very first mobile phone. You could argue that it was the mind of Ridley Scott that led to the invention of FaceTime, with his characters communicating through video calls in Blade Runner. There used to be far more respect for artists as the creators of culture, conjuring up ideas that would directly influence the real world and broaden the scope of our aspirations. But in recent years, this has stopped. We are no longer creating or even daring to imagine a better future for ourselves, something that has arisen from the declining lack of respect for the arts and our regression towards nostalgia. There are many people who no longer respect or see the merit of artistic expression, and as a result, very few people are given the chance to create challenging stories that depict realities too different from our own. There was an era in which the box office was dominated by futuristic and sci-fi stories that got people excited for the possibilities of the future. Now, the box office is dominated by a regression towards nostalgia, with every other film being a spin-off or remake of old IP. People aren't excited by the future because there are very few artists creating a future for us to be excited about. Instead, we've collectively decided that art is meaningless, and we might as well retreat to childhood stories and characters that used to comfort us. There is no better version of the world to look forward to, because the biggest studios in the world are making Harry Potter remakes, soon to be right-wing propaganda and Monopoly movies. Back to another reimagining of something you've already seen before. We live in a very me world. The internet has become an insufferable place where people feel they need to subtly and not so subtly brag about their lives, wardrobes, jobs, workout routines, social life, and postcode. Anything and everything can be exploited for attention, from IBS influencers to family vloggers and rage-bait journalists who whip everyone into a frenzy by claiming that something mundane is actually incredibly deep. Everybody has a voice and a way of sharing it, with a huge chip on the cultural shoulder that encourages us to express every fragment of individuality to affirm our humanity in a world that strips us of it. We must make ourselves known, and we must make everyone know how unique and special we are, even if we all end up being the same through our acts of assertion. The digital age has encouraged us to retreat inwards, losing sight of our insignificance and inflating the collective ego until we convince ourselves that our lives and voices are the most important. And in doing this, we've grown too cocky and lost sight of the bigger picture, doomed to repeat our past mistakes because we haven't listened to the voices who warned us about the reality we find ourselves in. It isn't that nobody is writing satire, it's that nobody will truly listen. In an era where everybody believes their opinion is the most important, nobody truly has a voice that matters. Nobody wants to assign importance to any experts because it threatens our ego and the hyper-individualistic culture that has deluded us into thinking that everybody is equally knowledgeable and entitled in sharing their opinions. People will debate with climate scientists on Twitter about the validity of climate change and the threat it poses, thinking they know just as much as they do. Letterboxd users will proclaim a filmmaker as pretentious for describing a lesser-known film as an influence, despite being an expert in their field who will have much broader taste than the average film watcher. Nobody is allowed to challenge or be an authority of something, because it goes against the entire framework and social hierarchy that we have created for ourselves in the digital age. Everybody and nobody matters, and when this happens, there is nobody truly worth listening to besides the people who simply mirror back ourselves. Satire is culturally important in preventing us from losing sight of ourselves, but even with so many warnings about the reality we find ourselves in right now, it didn't stop us from reaching this point. Everyday people became too self-absorbed, the people in power became too cocky, and we became distanced enough from our past mistakes that we started to forget them, retreating so far inwards that we couldn't see our slow relapse towards the act of repeating them. It's a slightly obvious one, but our declining media literacy skills and embrace of anti-intellectualism has done a fairly big number on our understanding of satire. The lack of effective satire means we have a skewed understanding of it, and the decline of the genre as a whole means we are inexperienced at interpreting it when it comes along. Something blatantly satirical will be misinterpreted, and people will find satirical meaning in something that isn't satirical. Combined with our declining respect for the arts and inability to assign weight to certain voices, we aren't interested in discovering the meaning behind things that are very meaningful, and dismiss the lack of meaning behind things that should be. Everything and nothing matters, so who cares if it has no meaning? You're now just pretentious for expecting it to. And if it does have meaning, few people respect the craft of creating it or the act of untangling its meaning, leading to a society that blindly embraces bad art and barely deciphers the good before quickly moving on. The world we live in now is increasingly polarized, with many people migrating towards opposite ends of the political spectrum and embracing extremist ideology. Satire only lands if we can agree on who the target of the critique is, but with a more fragmented culture, we can't agree on who is being critiqued. Polarization is a key satirical technique where you take an extreme side to prove how stupid something really is, but the radicalization of our world means that each extreme is someone's reality, and that group of people would just see it as a piece of media that affirms and encourages their reality. If you look at something like Andrew Callahan's Channel 5, the people he exposes don't see anything wrong with their way of thinking because there are many other people who believe the same thing. By filming it and sharing it online, it doesn't work to expose the absurdity of these beliefs because they're not critiquing a minority who can be changed, but a growing majority who can't see the error of their ways. The left will see that the videos are critical, but the right will only see it as media that endorses their ideology. So to them, it's not a critique, it's just free marketing. As I mentioned earlier, uneasiness should be the emotional result of effective satire. According to C. Hugh Holman, it should encourage complacent superiority only to shatter it, tease the onlooker until he does not know whether he feels pleasure or pain. When watching something like Succession, we're lured into this strange space where we at first feel assured in the knowledge that we are better than these characters, only to flip the mirror and expose the similarities we share with them. You don't want to identify or sympathize with the characters until you do, creating a strange uneasiness and inner contradiction. But these days, we're very afraid of media that challenges us. We want to be appeased, not affronted. But as Leonard Feinberg said, satire should be ambivalent and ambiguous, providing neither the catharsis of tragedy nor the escapism of romantic literature. It arouses conflicting emotions but does not quite satisfy them. Satire isn't supposed to be completely palatable. While it can be funny, there should always be this element of unease and discomfort. But many people don't want to watch something that makes them feel this way, and while I understand why, it has only made us less tolerant of stories we need to listen to, narrowed our capacity for introspection, and made it harder for satire to thrive. Great satirists go against the status quo, and while there are some people doing this, they are rarely seen or rewarded for it because social media homogenizes everything. The people at the top are the ones who personify and perpetuate everything wrong with modern culture, but the people at the top aren't going to satirize themselves. So when smaller content creators or artists create great satire, the algorithm doesn't promote their work but instead suppresses it, because it's easier to hide the underdogs than confront what they're saying. The internet doesn't favor originality, it rewards conformity and content that follows the mainstream current. The same thing goes for modern broadcasting and television. Especially in British broadcast television, the BBC used to have more funding to commission original shows and share ideas that challenge the people in power, with the golden era of British television being defined by satirical sketch comedy shows that mocked everything in our culture. Nobody was safe from being criticised, and primetime television was defined by shows like Beyond the Fringe, That Was the Week That Was, Spitting Image, and French and Saunders, with the careers of countless British comedy icons being launched through low-budget shows that struck a nerve in the culture but appealed to the masses by going after worthy targets. But the rise of streaming and subsequent lack of funding for the BBC means that there are now very few opportunities for new artists to develop television, especially not the kind of television that goes after people who are now much more powerful and unlikely to accept criticism being showcased on a wider platform. There are a few old classics like Have I Got News For You that are still going, but they mostly rely on much older and loyal viewers who still pay for a TV license. Most young people use streaming platforms instead of watching broadcast television, and while the streaming giants like Netflix used to commission more challenging shows, the Netflix originals being produced today rarely go against the status quo. The only reason why BoJack Horseman got away with the subject matter it covered was because it didn't have many viewers at the time of its release. As a result, the writers could be more daring with their cultural commentary and create episodes around controversial issues, unconcerned with appealing to the mainstream and knowing that a smaller audience gave them more creative freedom. I sincerely doubt that a show like BoJack Horseman would be made by Netflix today. A lack of commercial appeal and abundance of challenging material would banish it to the streaming graveyard after one season, and services like Netflix are now opting for increasingly safe and brainless content that numbs the masses instead of entertains or educates them. It is only when our political freedom is in danger that this safe style of content begins to grow, with self-censorship dominating our online interactions and encroaching on our personal creative freedom. Many of us are too afraid to say what we really feel. We don't want to really put ourselves out there, to take a risk, expose our ideas, or challenge the norm, because the consequences appear to be too huge. Many artists have had careers destroyed for speaking up at the right time, and it's happening again now. Talk show hosts and filmmakers are being threatened for addressing issues that they would rather we didn't talk about, hoping that we'll instead sit quietly at home and numb our brains through TikToks and TV shows that repeat every line of dialogue so we can watch two screens at once. Satire doesn't deaden the senses, it makes us alert and aware, and it doesn't benefit the people in power to have us think this way. The heart of our creative culture used to be comprised of satirical sketch shows, comedy acts, movies, and TV shows that held a mirror up to the absurdities and atrocities of our world. Politicians, government leaders, billionaires, and out-of-touch celebrities were all valid targets, and people weren't afraid to poke holes in the systems they created and proudly belonged to. Satire isn't just a form of entertainment, but an essential cultural barometer and enforcer of democracy. It's a point of connection, a way to bond over our common struggles and grievances, to voice our concerns and prompt change when the people in power grew too comfortable. It's an essential form of creative communication between the masses and the powers that be, and without it, Those people aren't being held accountable for their many failures, and we are being denied an avenue of political expression. While there is far more to mock and criticize about modern culture, there isn't much satire being produced from it. Many artists are intimidated by the task of tackling the nowness of everything, with few pieces of media that look at the real power players controlling the culture and modern trends that contain wells of unexplored conversations. There isn't much satire being created about the inefficiencies of our government, modern dating culture, influencers, technology, or the internet, and while some people have tried to address these issues, many people are unsatisfied by their depth and lack of nuance. In a weird way, our reality is being documented to an extreme level, but nobody feels as though this reality is being truly explored on screen, feeling both seen and unseen as the reality of modern life evades authentic representation. Films like Mickey 17, Spree, Wake Up Dead Man, and The Menu have tried, but very few have actually got to the crux of what's wrong with our culture. But while satire seems to be on the out, there might just be a new version of the genre taking shape that will keep it alive. There is some satire being created that criticizes our current reality, but it no longer resembles the satirical language that we're familiar with, slowly evolving into something different that is more reflective of our current reality. Eddington, directed by Ari Aster, was subject to intense criticism after its release, with audiences accusing the director of not taking a side and painting the far left and right as equally in the wrong. The same thing happened to Alex Garland's Civil War, with many people not liking that he didn't mention the cause of the war, dropping us in the middle of a conflict and almost deeming its cause as irrelevant. By the end of the film, he adopts a similar perspective to Aster, with both sides escalating to the extreme and becoming no different to each other in their capacity for wrongdoing. While I can understand why the ambiguous moral stance of these films was unpopular, I think Aster was onto something with his new vision of satire. The tagline for Eddington was "Hindsight is 2020", with the film following a power struggle between two men running for town sheriff at the beginning of the pandemic. While it's set inside a fictional town, it very much reflects the real collective madness that was induced by months of living in isolation, something that was only intensified by the waves of misinformation and paranoia that encouraged many to become absorbed by their most extreme thoughts. People moved towards more extreme ends of the ideological spectrum and became increasingly polarized in their political leanings, with new communities forming on the internet as people sought out others who validated their beliefs and blocked out anybody who went against them. After months of existing in digital spaces that were tailored to affirm our individual anxieties and fears, society became untethered from any sense of collective truth. And it's this idea that Aster is concerned with. In a world where truth no longer holds any value and nobody can agree on anything, how can we listen to each other and even begin to move forward? This is something that Aster explores through the opposing ideologies of Ted and Joe, the two central characters. Ted, played by Pascal, is a caricature of the far left, making laughably obvious attempts to gain support through capitalizing on his marginalized identity and personal tragedies, whether it be the mysterious disappearance of his wife or his duties as a single father. As time goes on, we can tell he cares less about being a good guy and more about maintaining the image of one. Phoenix's character, Joe, is a representation of the far right, unafraid of voicing his most controversial opinions and using vulnerable people as a scapegoat for the world's problems. He is someone we feel both pity and contempt for, as he manipulates the fears of the far right to reclaim power while using his platform to validate the most misguided ideas. But beneath his politics, we see someone whose personal life is crumbling, with his failing marriage only bolstering his campaign as he desperately clutches at a quest that gives him the illusion of control. His sense of powerlessness in his personal life is what births his most extreme views, trying to assert any sense of agency and reclaim a sense of sovereignty by creating new truths that are liberated from fact. Despite being unable to see their similarities, Ted and Joe are united through their lack of conviction and lack of integrity, with their campaigns being a way of pursuing power and manipulating their self-image. Neither truly cares about the political ideas they represent, but instead about creating an illusion that serves them. Ted wants to maintain an illusion of moral substance to avoid accountability, and Joe wants to maintain an illusion of control to avoid feeling emasculated and powerless. As well as this, the opposing political stances of both men are fueled by personal grudges they hold against each other after once dating the same woman, implying that their opposing views are only a way of provoking the other because they were once caught in the crossfire of a messy love triangle. Ultimately, both are completely performative in their political leanings and only care to align with the values that will fuel their bruised egos and aggravate the other. While there is one side committing worse evils than the other, both sides possess equal capacity for cognitive dissonance. In Civil War and Eddington, both directors pose the idea that in a climate where we define ourselves by our political leanings, our views become less about how our ideologies serve the world we want to live in, but in how they serve ourselves. Morality is now a malleable and egocentric concept that can be bent to support our selfish desires in any given situation, with very few people having a moral fibre that cannot be shaken by the possibility of personal gain. Jessie's moral compass is flexible and allows her to be on whichever side is closest to the best picture or protect her from danger. Ted and Joe don't truly believe any of the ideas that define their political campaigns. It's just a way of amplifying the voices of the people who will help bring them to power. Despite the extreme circumstances of these characters, there are examples of this that we see every day, whether it be liberal influencers doing Amazon brand deals, so-called feminists who work with abusers, performative males accused of sexual misconduct, pro-gun Americans who are shot to death, and pro-lifers who chant "my body, my choice" while refusing to wear masks. Eddington doesn't pick a side because in an increasingly polarized world, the biggest problem lies in our inability to communicate with each other and agree on collective truth. It wasn't made to point the finger or explore the beliefs of either side. Instead, Eddington explores the hyper-individualist culture that spawned from 2020 and what it means to live in a world where we've retreated so far inwards that nobody can agree on what is real, leading to total alienation on both sides as our political identities become our only identities. Satire only works if we can agree on a target, but because we cannot agree on this, Eddington poses whether modern satire can only survive by taking a centrist or impartial perspective, to present the extremes on both sides and the way this harms us all. Perhaps it must take a centrist perspective and indict everyone, because the problem lies not in our opposing beliefs, but in the fact that we are completely divided by our differences. When the worst has already happened, satire has evolved into a way of reiterating our need to re-engage with each other by highlighting just how far we have been pushed apart. We might not be able to agree on a solution or target, but perhaps we can at least agree on a universal problem, highlighting our point of no return in the hopes that we'll realize just how far we've gone. In the world we live in today, it is harder than ever to feel as though anything truly matters. Our voices are given too much weight in some spaces, yet don't mean a thing in others. Many people want to take a stance and say something, but are either too afraid to tackle the unknown and say something that goes against the grain, or have been so numbed by the media being produced and the ways we consume it that they no longer notice or care that it's happening. There are many people who benefit from the passive state of watching that has become the norm, numbing ourselves with content that encourages us to walk blindly through the world without questioning it. But satire can jolt us awake, make us feel angry and alert about the ways we are being tricked and the glaring problems that lay hidden in plain sight. A daring joke, cutting remark, or well-timed scene can be the only difference between a conversation that is had and one that is ignored, swaying our focus towards something that lies outside the bubble we are presented with and encouraging us to think deeper about the systems that control and bleed into every aspect of our reality. Satire might just seem like another genre that has lost popularity and has no impact on our culture anymore, but the reasons for its demise highlights just how crucial it is that it stays alive. It is only when our political freedom is in danger that satire is at risk of dying out, and it's because of this that we must demand more substance from what we watch, challenge the media we're being served, and engage with what's truly being said. Maybe the depths of human nature are unchanging and we will always be susceptible to the same traps, but it's only because we're being encouraged to do this by the media we watch, media that tells us we shouldn't care or listen to the perspective of other people. It isn't that satire is dying, but the qualities we used to value that made audiences open to it: honesty, integrity, compassion, and creativity. But if we start demanding these qualities from each other again, will not only be more receptive to satire and the world around us, but to each other.